Hi guys, so let's now take a look at LEDCs and obstacles to economic development and economic growth. Okay, so what are the things that really get in the way of LEDCs actually leveling up their economic development and their economic growth and really improving things? Well, it isn't necessarily the case that it's one element in particular. It can be, but it's more likely to be an actual multitude of factors. Let's take a look at what we've got. Firstly, there can be very high population growth within LEDCs, and if that population growth is greater than the income growth, of course that's going to really decelerate the rate of economic growth that is actually taking place anyway. So that can be a real problem. Don't forget, with LEDCs, we are dealing with a situation where when it comes to birth control, there may be very poor access to such sophisticated. So don't forget, when it comes to LEDCs, we're also dealing with a situation where it may be difficult to access suitable birth control, and that can pose a real problem in terms of population growth. Number two, savings gap. The savings gap simply refers to the fact that you may have a very, very low level of savings, which doesn't enable you to actually fulfill your economic objectives. And what it would then lead to, in all likelihood, is poor capital accumulation, that you don't really develop your capital goods, and therefore your productivity cannot really increase, okay? So that can be a real problem as well. Low savings mean that you're likely to have low levels of capital investment. Then we've got poor infrastructure. Now, that infrastructure can be socially damaging. So for communities that they don't have good access to telecoms and let alone internet or broadband connections or anything like that. So that can pose a real problem. But that can pose problems in terms of depositing money as well in banks, and further reduce the actual level of savings that is actually taking effect. But in addition to that, there's other problems with the infrastructure, and that may be poor quality roads, and that really does restrict the supply side of the economy. Okay, so number four, we've got low levels of human capital, of course, because we know LEDCs, they rank poorly on the HDI index, and one of our key indicators, of course, is education. So yeah, when you have a low level of human capital, it means that the actual revenue productivity or marginal revenue product of your labourers is likely to be relatively low. And then there's the economist Paul Collier's, and then there's the economist Collier's development traps. And Collier really did identify four key things that he believed would really trap an economy in an LEDC state so that it cannot actually develop. And that firstly is the reliance on natural or primary resources. Now, having that reliance upon those resources can pose a couple of problems really. Firstly, there's the notion of resource depletion. So that can be an issue. You may actually fully exploit the abundant resources that you once had, and they're no longer abundant, of course. So that can be a problem. But in addition to that, there may be very volatile prices. That can affect your export earnings. Further to this, we know that the prices of primary goods over time will not necessarily keep up with those of imported capital and consumer goods from abroad, and as such there may be declining terms of trade, which really fits with the Prebisch-Singer hypothesis. Okay, in addition to this, there may be conflict, of course. So war is certainly going to get in the way of setting up your own business and establishing microfinance units and so on. They may also be landlocked and have bad neighbours as well. So being landlocked can be a real problem to many sub-Saharan African economies, and it's made even worse when their neighbours are just not ready to actually engage in trade. Then we also see this last point about corruption. So corruption and poor governance So this can be at a macro level for the whole government as a whole, and it may well actually mean that there is poor ruler. So when it comes to our last point here, corruption and poor governance, it may actually refer to the fact that there is a poor. So when it comes to our last point here, corruption and poor governance, that may simply reflect the fact that the system or the economy is corrupt, whether that is at a macro level. Well, if that's the case, it's likely to be the case all the way down and be rotten throughout the core. That's likely to mean that resources get directed to wrong areas. It may mean that the most affluent in society are deliberately siphoning off resources, and there is capital flight taking place as they direct their own resources abroad, perhaps. In addition to that, it may also mean that, of course, there is a complete misallocation of resources and there's inallocative efficiency of capital your more general factors of production there. Okay, so there's a number of key factors here that are really at play. Great stuff, guys. I hope that's been useful. See you next time.